this is to address a point made by somebody named Frame Games Radio on Twitter, and it's at Frame Games. He has a lot of insights into postmodern deception and leftist stratagems. And he talks about how the left has made a concerted effort to unthing white identity. And that's through the use of conflation. And so basically, if you can imagine the political spectrum, with over on the far end, you've got anti-white, where you're pro-minorities, pro-POC, but it's anti-white. You're against white interests. And then over here, slightly overlapping is, your colorblind, conservative egalitarianism. Your individualist meritocracy, so to speak. And then, you've got a white identity circle that overlaps with that somewhat. And that just means, you have an identity as a white person. And, you're proud of your heritage, you're proud of your ancestors, and you identify with them. You may not necessarily have any animosity towards others. And then, another overlapping circle for white nationalism. And you may not have any animosity towards others still. It could just be like, hey, everybody can have their own nations. Except for white people, why can't we have our own nations too? You don't necessarily have to hold any ill will towards people. You just have a preference for your own, or for homogeneity, which is a perfectly valid preference. And then over on the far corner is white supremacy. And this is already kind of a loaded term like racism, which white supremacy is basically used to represent any kind of white sovereignty. Like if you don't want to be ruled over by aliens or subject to aliens, that's white supremacy. But, at least as classically conceived, there's a strong aspect of value judgment there. You're making a determination or a statement that whites are objectively superior and therefore entitled to rule. And that's white supremacy. Maybe not just within a country, but throughout the world. And so you've got this spectrum of overlapping circles. Now, why would you want to conflate the middle categories away into one extreme? And they've all been conflated into the white supremacy extreme right now. So even the conservative, colorblind egalitarianism is now a form of white supremacy, or a legacy of white supremacy, or something only a white supremacist could believe, right? Because if you're not anti-white, you're white supremacist. That's the conflation game that they've been playing. They've been conflating all of these other things as white supremacy, which they define as the most extreme possible form of, ethnocentric loyalty and outgroup hostility. And so, you want to play that conflation game because you don't want people to leave this anti-white circle. And so you have to make everything that's not anti-white, that has to be something really bad that people don't want to go to. And so they use the white supremacy circle for that purpose. And they load it with all sorts of moral baggage, right? Moral and emotional baggage. Oh, it's despicable. It's repugnant. It's disgusting. White supremacy. Yeah. Disgusting. Yeah. Vile. Evil. Right? So, they've set up this false dichotomy where there are two choices. There's anti-white and then there's white supremacy. And then this one over here is literally the most evil thing you could possibly imagine. And there's this parade of commas of just emotionally and morally laden terms to describe how bad it is. And it's not an argument. None of it is an argument. It's just meant to elicit an emotional reaction. And it's pretty effective at doing that. And so they want to keep you over here in this anti-white circle. And the way they do that is they conflate everything to the right of that circle with the worst possible thing to the right of that circle. And then they lay on the emotional and moral loading, framing and loading. Talked about this postmodern deception stuff before. That's how they do. And then the final piece of the puzzle is overloading. So repeat that on full blast, all channels, all frequencies, all the time. And that's how they establish their false narrative. And it's pretty effective. Most people are going to fall for this. But there's a silver lining, which is that they're banking on some false assumptions to make this work long term. And one of those is that we're not going to be willing to go to the extreme to reclaim our identities and to fight for our interests. And that's not true of all of us. Some of us will be willing to go to the extreme in order to do that. And the second assumption that they're making is that even if we do, there'll be enough normies to stop us. And that's true for now, right? And maybe it'll continue being true for a long time. Most South Africans are normies, if you can imagine that. So, in the starkest possible situation, you still have most people being normies and falling for this shit. Now the question of whether it's enough, that's a different question, because normies don't necessarily have the courage of their convictions. They are tepid, they're lukewarm. They want to go along to get along. They don't want to upset the apple cart. They don't want to rock the boat. And they can be threatened with loss of livelihood, loss of social approval, social status. And that's what this whole game is banking on. But the thing is, these leftists, they don't have much to offer in the way of positive incentives. Like, if there were any gains to pick up from diversity, they've been picked up already. And now we're in territory of steeply declining marginal returns and exploding marginal costs. So, anytime they push this agenda, it's going to be destructive and parasitic and negative sum. Not just zero sum, but negative sum. Like when you take a high trust, homogenous nation and you diversify it, the trust evaporates. The trust evaporates and the social capital evaporates. And so that means a lot of opportunities that people had before to generate wealth and do other things are going to evaporate with that trust and with that social capital. And so, transaction costs are going to go up. The imposed costs of diversity and proximity are going to go up. And, people are going to be a lot less well off, or at least the people who used to live there. The newcomers might be better off. But, there's ultimately going to be an equilibrium where once you take a developed first world country and you import enough third worlders to make it into a third world country, then there's no longer even any incentive for third worlders to continue moving because they can't improve, their quality of life by moving, by imposing the costs of their third worldness on the first worlders. But for now, there's still that incentive to keep bringing in third worlders. They're still benefiting out of the deal, even though we aren't. But the point is, as far as offering positive benefits, we're long past that threshold. They don't have any more positive benefits to offer, if they ever had any. So, the cost of their demands, the cost of meeting their demands is just going to continue to go up. And, so there's going to be more and more people finding themselves in the same situation we find ourselves, which is that we have relatively little to lose by going to the extreme and relatively a lot to gain. We can gain our country back. That's a lot to gain. And if we don't do that, we lose everything. And that's a lot to lose. So, this assumption that there's always going to be enough normies to stop us may not necessarily hold, because more and more normies are going to start waking up and realizing that, they don't really have anything to lose by going over to the extreme, and they have a lot to gain, potentially. And so both of those assumptions are going to become less true and less strong over time. That people aren't willing to go over to the extreme, and that there's still going to be enough normies left to stop them. So eventually we're going to reach a tipping point. And, when we do reach that tipping point, they're going to be right to fear the wrath they have aroused and the monster they have created. And they're going to have created something far worse than their paranoid fever dreams ever could have imagined. It's going to be glorious. It's going to be something that is written about for thousands of years. And something that is whispered in hushed tones, as a warning to others. It's going to be truly biblical when that tipping point is reached. It's going to be truly horrific. And it's going to be great.